It's episode 88 of the Author Stories podcast. I'm your host, Hank Garner. Today's show is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/Hank. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Today's show is also brought to you by Gamefly.com. Sign up for a premium, free 30-day trial specifically for my listeners of the Author Stories podcast at gameflyauthor.com/Hank. That's www.gameflyoffer.com/Hank. Don't forget the 3 W's at the beginning. Today's guest is Chris Fox. Chris has an incredible story of going from a hobbyist writer to having a full-time writing career. And we're also giving away a pack of books from Chris. All you have to do is share the show on social media or on your blog or whatever, and then comment on this show and tell us that you did. And I'll draw a winner next week. On to our show with Chris Fox. Thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. I'm very pleased today to have Chris Fox on the show with me, and Chris is someone whose work I've admired for a while and have actually benefited from, as well as am really intrigued by his fiction and nonfiction alike. Chris is one of these rare fellows that seems to do it all. And I'm very happy to have Chris on the show with me today. We've got a lot to talk about, but I'm just going to go ahead and introduce you. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Hank. I'm a big fan of the show, so it's a real treat to be here.
Thank you so much. I begin each show by asking a variation of the same question, and that is, when did you first know that you wanted to be a writer? And I've had to amend this question a little bit, and or storyteller. When did you know that thing was you?
I first decided I wanted to be a writer when I was about 6, and probably for the next decade, that was my top priority. I really wanted to do it. But around age 16, I started to think maybe this isn't possible, and so I moved away from it. So I if I had it to do over, I would go back and write more at a younger age. But yeah, I started at a young age wanting to do this and sort of got derailed by life like so many of us have been.
That answer is one of the most common answers is, I've just always been a writer. I've always been a storyteller, or at a very young age, I realized that this was something I wanted. But few people, think seriously when they're young that this is something that I can do. And it sounds like for you that for about 10 years there, this was a pretty serious pursuit of yours. What happened at age 16 that you started doubting yourself?
So I published my very first short story. It was in kind of a student journal. At the time, I was in a gifted and talented program, and they paired me up with a professional author by the name of Paul Garner, great guy. And so he taught me a little bit about craft, but what I got to see is that writing didn't pay Paul any money. He had books out, they were in bookstores, but his job was being a professor at Syracuse University. It wasn't really a way to make a living. It was just something cool you got to talk about at parties. And so when I published my first short story, and literally no one read it, not even members of my family, I just looked at it like, my God, I'm going to invest so much of myself into this, and can I really write a book that people are going to want to read? And at age 16, I didn't think it was possible, so I gave up.
Wow. So this person you were you looked up to, and you just didn't see it working out for them. Did you ever have conversations with him? Did he ever give you like, hey kid, this is the reality of being a professional writer, or was this just your observations?
It was would have given me more of a straight answer and told me that if I went with genre fiction, I'd have a better chance. Back then, I didn't understand the difference between literary writing and genre writing. So Paul wrote literary novels, which is part of why he wasn't making a ton of money from them. And back then, people like Stephen King were killing it, and it was possible to make a living, but I didn't understand that.
So at 16, you kind of lost hope that this was a real expectation that you could have. What did you do then?
So I moved into computers. This was the advent of the web. So in 1994, when I started going to college, I learned how to do basic web design and became a programmer and a computer tech, and so moved fully into that realm. But I always loved creating. So on the side, I was still running role-playing games for my friends and writing short stories and kind of trying to find that creative outlet. And then in, I think, 2004, I submitted a short story to a magazine called The Rifter, which was based around one of these games that I played, and they published it and asked me for more. And they sent me a check for $75, and I got to see my name in print, and that sort of re-sparked my interest in writing.
Wow. $75 is real money, especially for a short story. That's quite an accomplishment for the first one you submitted like that. That's great.
Yeah, I was shocked. I had no idea it was even published until a box showed up on my desk with 10 copies of that issue of The Rifter and the check. So they never wrote back to say, hey, we're taking your short story. They just sent me some money.
Oh, wow. So were you bitten by the bug at that point?
I was, and I immediately leapt into trying to write my first novel, and then very quickly figured out I had no idea.
You cut out. You had no idea what?
No idea how to write a novel.
So where did you go from there? Obviously you're still working the day job, but did you was the spark reignited again that, hey, maybe this is something that I can pursue, and obviously I'm going to have to do it alongside what my day job and what I'm doing, but did you start kind of getting that fire kindled again?
I did, and I started writing a lot more, largely during any break at my day job that I could find. And a few years passed, and I wasn't able to complete a novel, but I was getting closer. And then I started to see the self-publishing revolution and almost put out my first book in 2010, but I got derailed because at the same time the iPhone and iPad were becoming big. First iPad had just came out, and I realized I'm a programmer. I could became a software engineer and did that for the next few years, and that's why my first book didn't come out until 2014.
So you said you wrote the short stories, but you didn't have you didn't know how to write a novel and didn't have the confidence to do it. First, speak to what the difference is in writing short fiction and long fiction. I think some readers don't quite understand the different mindset, the different tool set that comes into writing short fiction, which tends a lot of times to be one scene or just a very narrow scope, with a novel that tends to be a much broader scope and usually is a longer time period, more character development, all of that. Would you kind of speak to the differences in those?
Sure. There's an order of magnitude difference in complexity for a novel. So a short story, you need to do like A leads to B leads to C, done. And it's pretty easy to do that if you haven't written before. When you go into a novel, I always start, now that I know what I'm doing, with the ending. What is the epic ending going to be? Who is my great protagonist? Who is my, super evil antagonist? And then I sort of plot backwards. When you're working with a short story, and my first novel reflects this, it'll never see the light of day, I thought you just kind of kept writing. So you'd write your first chapter and then the next chapter, and you just sort of gradually uncover a plot as you go. And when I was done, I ended up with about 800 pages on what I call the novel that was just one long adventure with no beginning, middle, or end. When you're doing a novel, you really have to have some idea of where kind of your big breaks are. So the 3-act structure is very popular for a reason. And if you follow it, much like Star Wars did, you can tell a great story. you have to apply those story frameworks to longer fiction, like not so much in fiction.
Chris?
Still with me?
Oh yeah, you dropped out there at the very end. No, it's okay. So so we've got orders of magnitude, a difference in short fiction, long fiction, or novel length fiction. How did your growth as a writer? Could you tell that you were developing the skills to get you to that point that you wanted to be? And was there any daily or weekly writing ritual that you used to hone those skills?
In the beginning, it was really unstructured. I tried to write every day. And that can be hard when you're new at your craft because you don't really know that you're any good. And in fact, you're pretty sure you're not.
Right.
So I had a hard time initially. The further I got, the more I had a little bit of confidence that maybe I could do this. But it wasn't until I started dating a girl who started reading my fiction and liking it that I found some confidence and then used that to build some solid rituals around writing.
That's great. So you also talked about your mentor, if you will, that was writing literary fiction, and you said that if he would have given you the advice that if you wrote in genre fiction, that you could actually make a go at this. When you first started writing, you said you created a short story around this game you were playing, so you were obviously in genre fiction, probably science fiction, fantasy, if I have to guess. Speak a little bit to the differences in genre, and traditionally genre has kind of been looked down upon by more quote serious writers, but that's not true. Kind of talk about that, if you will.
Sure, and I think the stigma is fading, which is good, but the stigma used to be that genre fiction was garbage and literary fiction is what you needed to kind of expand your mind. Genre fiction is anything that's in a genre: westerns, science fiction, romance. All of those are offshoots that are more about telling a good story and less about literary merit. And these days, I think more people realize that you can do both. You can tell a great story and have literary value in that story at the same time. But if you're not starting with a great story, very few people are going to want to read it.
True. And I talked about this with Dan Wells the other day, that at the heart, all great stories are human stories, and genre is kind of the window dressing that we put on it, and it gives us a vehicle to tell those stories, but at the heart we all want to know about character and what happens to people, or maybe not people, depending on what genre it is, but it all has to get down to tapping into the human emotion. So tell me about the first novel that you attempted.
So the first novel that I attempted was called Yuri Silvertongue and the Violet Spire. It was epic fantasy. The main character was kind of a swashbuckling pirate, traveling around, having great adventures. And it was a ton of fun to write. It was based loosely on one of the other role-playing games that I'd played called Exalted. And I had a tremendous amount of fun writing it, and I learned a lot from writing it, how to tell a good story and how to craft a scene. But yeah, there was no overarching conflict. I didn't understand things like you needed to tie up plot threads. There were a lot of problems with it, and looking back at it today, I do sort of cringe.
Everybody seems to attempt an epic fantasy as their first book. That's a recurring theme in these interviews. What do you think it is about epic fantasy that people aspire to?
I think we had such a huge generation of readers grow up reading things like The Wheel of Time and Lord of the Rings, and all of us want to do our own opus like that. But we don't understand that that's the pinnacle of your craft, and that you probably need to branch out and try to write some other types of novels first so that you can get some writing chops before you attempt one of those.
Yeah. And no one also wants to recognize that Tolkien took years and years and years to put those books together, and would have liked to tinker with it, until the very end. So I guess that kind of is par for the course, and even the masters that we look at that make it look so easy, the truth is they probably were never completely happy with it either.
Right, and I think there's a lot that goes on under the hood. I'm told may not have recognized.
Yeah, absolutely. So you got into app development, and the kind of the mobile technology boom started pulling you away again. When did you said that you started to recognize the self-publishing kind of indie revolution that was going on? What piqued your interest and started pulling you back again?
So getting back to the girl that I was dating, who is now my fiance, she finished up all of the work that I had written.
Nice.
And asked what else I had, and I had a 75% finished novel called No Such Thing as Werewolves. So while working my day job, I put in the time to finish that book up and polish it, mostly just to impress her, and yay, it worked. But afterwards, then I realized, well, wait a minute, now I've got a completed. What do I do with this thing? And so that's sort of how I got to finishing the first one. And little investigation, I realized there's no gatekeeper anymore. I can just put this up on Amazon if I want to and see how it does.
Nice. And so you finished that book. First off, tell me where the idea came from. No Such Thing as Werewolves. What's the story about, and how did this idea hatch for you?
So the basic premise. Supernatural creatures has a grain of truth, and it comes from the distant past. And I tied that in with some science fiction approach where I wanted there to be a reason why something like a werewolf could exist, a reason why moonlight would cause it to change, a reason why they'd be vulnerable to silver. So I started researching all that stuff, and in the process really got into genetics and anthropology. So I invented a culture that is currently something mankind doesn't know about, my version of Atlantis, I guess you might say, that used to exist and has since disappeared, and all of a sudden traces of this culture are returning. It's heralding a big change in the world. There's an apocalypse coming. These werewolves are back. People aren't sure why, and so our main character is an anthropologist trying to tie all these things together. Why, what's that about? Could possibly werewolves exist, and so he starts, scientifically piecing together all of these at once, and by the end of the book, it all ties up.
So what is it about the idea of a distant past and these maybe creatures and civilizations that are more more enchanting than we get to run into every day? What do you think it is that appeals to us about those kinds of stories?
I think it has to do with frontiers. So if you look back to when dime novels were popular, people loved reading about the Wild West because it was still an unknown frontier. They could learn about something new in writing. It's the same science. The idea that there is to know about the origins of mankind, and maybe there could be this great looming mystery, is very exciting to us because, I don't know, it sort of bores a lot of us to think that we've learned everything there is to know about where we come from as a species and what exists in the world.
How long did it take for you to write that novel? You said you had it 75% complete. How long had you been working on it?
Probably a year to a year and a half at that point. It took me another 6 months to finish it, so around 2 years to finish that book.
Now, that's very interesting to me because I know how the story goes from there, but I won't spoil it for everybody. But that was compared to your process now. That took a long time. Were you still kind of working through storycraft, or as you wrote that book, were there things that you learned that were kind of like aha moments for you?
A ton of them, yes. I did multiple drafts on that book, and I showed it to a lot of beta readers, and beta readers gave me some amazing feedback that helped me understand how better to craft a story. So I cut like 20% of the book. I fixed a lot of plot problems based on reader feedback, and it was really a learning book for me, and I was a much stronger writer when I was done with it.
So you finished that book and you published it. Did you upload to KDP? Was that your first inclination?
I didn't do it immediately. I actually wrote the sequel before I released the first book. So it was probably 9 months after I finished the book that I put it out there. But yeah, when I did publish it, I put it up on Amazon and Amazon only.
What was the thought process behind holding onto that book and writing a sequel?
In hindsight, it wasn't necessarily the smartest move, but my thought was I can give the first book one more look if I finish the second book first and then make sure they sort of relate better to each other. So it was mostly just fear that was preventing me from publishing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can see there could be some wisdom in that especially for a new writer who's going to start with a series. But you said that it was mostly fear motivating that. If you could do it again, do you think that that confidence that you would have had the confidence to finish a second book and make sure that you tied up loose ends? I mean, was that just beginner's fear? Was there anything you learned in the process that could have made you better at that?
Yeah, it was definitely beginner's fear. If I had released the book right when I finished it and it had done what the book did and been very successful, that would have spurred me on immediately to work much, much harder on the sequel. And instead of it taking me like 6 months to write No Mere Zombie, I probably could have done it in 2 or 3 once I had seen that there was really something to this whole self-publishing thing.
So when you did publish, what happened? How was the response to the book?
For the first few weeks, not much of anything. I spent almost $1,000 on advertising that did very, very little. I lost a lot of money. And then I figured out that keywords were important. I made a change to the keywords, and the book started climbing in the ranks. And once it found its footing, it settled in around 6,000 in rank and stayed there for like 5 months.
Wow. That is fascinating. Because I think there are a lot of authors who have had high hopes and expectations for a book, publish it, and it does okay, but then just kind of flounders. What was it about keywords that you learned that spurred that big spike?
I think it was the last piece of the puzzle. So there's no magic bullet when it comes to publishing, but in this case, I had a pretty good book. I had a good cover. I had a really compelling blurb. I just didn't have a way to get it in front of people. And when I changed the keywords, it started showing up in the same searches as other werewolf books. And as soon as some people had bought it, I was then in the also bots for people like Mark Tufo and T.W. Piperbrook and all the other people that write about werewolves. And once their audiences found the book, it started to take off.
So where did you research the keywords, and was it very deliberate for you, or is this something you stumbled upon?
I want to say it was listening to something Nick Stevenson said initially that made me look into it. But all I did was went to Amazon and I typed in the word werewolf space, and then you get a list of autocomplete options. And I found the autocomplete options I thought people would be using if they were searching for a scary book about werewolves, and I just used those terms.
Wow. And so you took your kind of IT mindset and brought it over to book publishing. I like that. I like writers who take a scientific approach to their writing and to their publishing. That's great. So you published the sequel shortly after that?
The sequel came out in April, so almost 6 months to the day after the first book, yes.
Okay. Did you change that sequel? You said you held on to both of them until you finished the second one before publishing the first one. Did the second one change after that?
Not much. Most of it was just editing. So I hired a developmental editor for the first time. She gave me some great suggestions on a few plot changes. And the rest of it was just editing, trying to make sure there were no typos, which incidentally I failed miserably at.
Yeah, it happens. So you start finding some success with this. What was how did this affect your motivation, and how did this affect the mindset that you had been carrying since you were 16 years old? That this is not something that you can take seriously. It'll just have to be for fun.
It was really interesting because it kind of crept up gradually. So at the time, I had a wonderful six-figure salary as a software engineer and was just doing this as a hobby on the side. But as the money started growing month to month to month, and I realized, wait, I'm making thousands of dollars every month from selling books about werewolves, I realized I could actually do this for a living and replace my software job as a writer, and that's feasible. And that idea has been lurking in the back of my head for probably the last year and a half because I knew I could do this. And every month it got harder to go in and do software when I realized I could sit home and write if I preferred.
Sure. So how many novels do you have out now?
I currently have 4 novels, 1 novella, and 3 nonfiction books.
Okay. And what do you think was the do you think keywords was the linchpin for you to shift into that other category where you're moving many books a day instead of one book a day like a lot of writers kind of flounder in? Do you attribute that all to keywords?
I would say that was probably the straw that finally broke the camel's back. Everything else had to be in place first. I made sure I had a wonderful cover. I spent, $500-600 getting original artwork made, and people loved that cover. I had talked to my beta readers about the blurb to make sure that the blurb worked well. I started getting onto podcasts. I was on Rocking Self-Publishing very, very early. I only had that one book out, and got him to talk about it a little bit, so that generated some sales. I threw money at advertising and had a little bit of success there. So it was taking the shotgun approach, and every time I did something, saying to myself, either it worked or it didn't, I'm going to learn from this. And 75% of the tactics that I tried failed miserably, but the 25% that worked well.
You mentioned earlier that when you launched that first book that you threw a lot of advertising dollars at it. And that was not very successful. What sort of advertising did you do?
I went to any book site that would take me, from ENT to Kindle Daily Nation to the Fussy Librarian, and a few of those sold books, and most of them, like Kindle Daily Nation, did not. So I paid Kindle Daily Nation something like $600, and I think I got a total of maybe 12 sales from them.
Wow. Why do you think that is? Do you have any inclination as to why? That's the common knowledge would be that if you want something to be successful, throw a lot of advertising at it, get it in front of as many people as you can. But for some reason, that doesn't always make people want to buy. Any ideas why that was? Why that happened or didn't happen for you?
I do, and I've since learned enough that I've turned my career around. Reader psychology is very important to understand, and just human psychology in general. And 2 of the things that I studied for No Such Thing as Werewolves were psychology and neuroscience. And this was totally accidental, but what this clued me into is starting to think about, well, how do people think about this? How do people find books? From an email blast from BookBub, or is it one of my friends tells me, hey, Chris, you got to check this out? And when I started realizing how books tend to spread, I tried to do the same thing. So I personally hear a lot of my book recommendations on places like Reddit. So I started using Reddit as a vehicle to let other people know that I had a book out, and that's where I started seeing some success.
So more of a a personal viral marketing as opposed to just the scattershot sling things at strangers all day long kind of approach.
Yeah, I think we're also fatigued by that. I mean, no one wants to be advertised to anymore.
Yeah.
Where it happens in every aspect of our lives, from television to our email box. We would much prefer to find things organically. It's more about getting pointed towards your work from signposts that they trust, which is usually going to be a friend recommendation or a community that they're a part of that they trust, all saying, hey, this is great, you got to check it out.
Yeah. Um, I know that you have been very active on K-boards. How has that helped, or and I'm using K-boards as a generality of connecting with other writers and other people in the same stage of the process as you. How has that community benefited you?
Immensely. I wouldn't be anywhere close to where I am today without communities like K-boards, and other communities that have been an outgrowth of K-boards. I've made so many friends amongst authors, many of whom are doing much, much better than I am and have taught me a ton, some of whom I'm now trying to pay it forward to help. I've been introduced to podcasts. Apple indirectly found me from being part of one of those communities and really helped me push my books on their platform. Things that I'm doing wrong and more things that I could do right. I mean, it's like K through 12 for writers. Being in a forum like that, you can learn so much about how to be successful in this craft just by going to one of these communities and soaking up the knowledge there.
Yeah. As happens to every community, especially online communities, with the good, you also tend to encounter there's a certain signal to noise ratio that has to be factored in. How do you approach communities, online communities especially, and learn to take the good while sifting out maybe advice that's not so good, or just kind of the drama that sometimes comes along with just people connecting?
You're going to see that, I think, in every community. So what I learned, and this comes from my days in video games when I played MMOs like World of Warcraft, live and let live and decide for yourself whether or not what you're hearing is worth listening to. So when you are reading through these threads, you're going to hear good advice and you're going to hear bad advice. If you hear something that you think is good advice, then try taking it, and maybe it'll work and maybe it won't. You're only going to know if you experiment for yourself. And if you hear bad advice or you see drama, I try to empathize with the person who's doing it and say, well, maybe they're doing it for a reason I'm unaware of. If somebody cuts me off in traffic, maybe they're rushing to a hospital. Give it as positive a spin as you can and just try and rise above the drama.
Right. That's good advice. Because I think there comes a point where we tend to want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We just kind of get frustrated with people and the things that come along with relationship. And usually there's a lot of good there that you just have to take a moment and sift through. And sometimes the relationships that are made there are worth more than the advice that you get. That's something you have to keep in mind as well. So tell me about your nonfiction. I actually found you. I believe I heard you on Simon's podcast, the Rocking Self-Publishing podcast, and then I'm not sure if it was through there or after that I found your book 5,000 Words Per Hour. But that was a great eye opener for me. I won't say that I have taken all of the tips and advice and integrated all of them, but I've definitely taken your concepts and some of the motivation from that to increase my own productivity. Where did this book come from, and how has this changed your workflow?
The book came about as a part of me having very limited time to do my writing, like so many people do. So the best I could do was put in an hour a day, and I needed to figure out how can I maximize that hour and still get novel out. Figured out that the best way to do that was to try to get myself into flow state where all I was doing was writing and being in the heads of the characters. And when I did that, I found that I put out my most words. So I started tracking how much I was writing, when I was writing it, and kind of concocted this system of writing as fast as possible. And before I knew it, I went from, 1,000 words every other day to 5,000 words consistently every single day.
That is, there are a lot of writers who look at 2,000 words a day as a high water mark. When you're getting this 5,000 words a day, is this what do you do with those 5,000 words after that? Is there a lot of editing that happens after that? When you get these 5,000 words, are these usable words? That's not a great way. Are these do these 5,000 words find their way into your final manuscript?
Yes, they do. And the more I write, the more that's true. So most people assume you have to make a choice between quality and quantity. And I don't think that's true. I think your goal is quality and quantity. And I will ask the audience members personally this question. Think about your own writing, if you are a writer. And when you wrote your best scene ever, did you crank that out really quickly because you were lost in the moment and you were caught up in that flow state? Or did you agonize and tinker over every word and it took you an hour to get down a paragraph?
Right. I think there's a fallacy that's been perpetuated, especially by the traditional publishing model where you've got a writer that publishes one novel a year. And so the assumption that goes along with that from a reader's perspective is it took this writer a whole year to craft this 400 page novel. And anyone who's ever, like you said, got into the flow state and really, when the characters are talking to you and you're just dictating what's happening, you start to realize really quickly that it doesn't take a whole year to write a novel. When did that realization start dawning on you?
In March of 2015, I wrote a novel in 13 days for the first time. It was called Project Solaris. And when I realized 13 days after starting, hey, it's been less than 2 weeks and I finished a whole book, that, flipped a lot of switches in my head.
Yeah. So what happened during those 13 days? What changed in your process that you got to the end of it and said, holy crap, I've got a novel?
I think it was the culmination of just spending so much time writing and getting faster and better. So I had been writing 5,000 words a day for a while by that point. And just sitting down finally and knowing what I was going to write. So plotting out this book ahead of time and saying, okay, here's roughly what I want to have done. Looking at the calendar and saying, okay, if I do 5,000 words a day, it should be done by this day. And then following through with and finishing the book in that time period. I was just like, wow, I can't believe I just did that. And it feels like something I can replicate.
You have a new book that just came out. Talk about about writing to market.
Oh, this one will be controversial because
Okay.
Write to market is a dirty word in the literary world. But the crux of writing to market is this. Before you sit down to write word one of your book, you should have some idea that a market exists that will want to read that book. If you don't do this, you could write a wonderful novel and put it out there and find that no one wants to read it because people tend to read something where they can say in their head, okay, I liked A and this is like A. So, for example, my next book is science military fiction. Who like things like Battlestar Galactica are going to see the cover of this book and be like, oh, okay, that's similar to Battlestar Galactica. I'll give it a chance.
That's when I begin brainstorming a project, a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times I'll sit down in Photoshop and start sketching out cover ideas. And some people kind of look at me and think that, well, you're going about it all backwards. But for a lot of times, for me to get into the mind of the story and into the setting, I need some visual cues that go along with that. And it sounds like you're talking about those similar things. You need to know where you're going before you start.
Definitely. I have a cover made before I write the first word of a novel.
I like that. That's great. I'm not crazy.
No, it's done wonders for activity. Look, you get inspired.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You recently have gone full time as a writer. What number one? What enabled you to do that, and how? I know you're a couple of weeks in now, but how is your daily schedule and process changing due to that freedom?
The milestone that I needed to hit was financial, and I wanted to have a year's worth of my expenses saved and also have paid off all debt before I quit the day job. I accomplished, and then I stayed for finally today. It has been simply amazing. Prior to this, I had maybe an hour or two a day where I could focus on writing, and the rest of my time I worked at a busy startup in San Francisco as the sole iOS developer. So it was catch as catch can. Now I can do pretty much what I want when I want, which allows me to do a lot more long-term planning, a lot more brainstorming and research, and still hit those big weird goals that I had before.
Yeah. Let's get a little perspective here. When did you publish No Such Thing as Werewolves?
October of 2014.
Okay, so we are 2014. We're 16 months, give or take?
Yep.
16, 17 months. And you went from never publishing a novel to writing full-time with a year's worth of your expenses as a cushion. Did you ever imagine in the beginning that in 16, 17 months you could be at that position?
Absolutely not. I had no idea this was even possible. I assumed that maybe I'd be able to make my car payment. That was my goal at the time from writing. And if it was never any more than that, I'd be a happy man. But it turns out it's a lot more lucrative than I thought it would be.
That's amazing. Any tips that you would give for someone first publishing? Obviously, find a genre that you're interested in and can write for. And keywords. What else would you tell someone starting out that wants to have a similar success that you've had?
I would give 3 pieces of advice. So the first piece is approach this like a business. Yes, you are an artist, but if you want to sell your art, you need to do this like it's a business. Second, I would say you need to write to market and sort of pay your dues before writing all the wonderful stories floating around in your head. So find something that you like writing that people also like reading. Write it will do that. You want to be $3 buy a copy. And then the last piece of advice would be make sure you write every single day. I don't care what you write. I don't care if you're even working on a novel. Get into the habit of just sitting in that chair and cranking out some words every day.
That's excellent advice, Chris. What is on the horizon for you? What comes up next?
So I am doing a fairly large stunt that I think will be a lot of fun. I'm calling it the 21-Day Novel Challenge. So a lot of people have been kind of detractors of 5,000 words per hour, and I'm starting to accumulate some already for Write to Market. So what I decided to do is write a book to market using my methodology, write it really fast using 5,000 words per hour, and then publish it. And so I'm documenting that entire process. The name of the book is called Destroyer. It's military science fiction. And I'm going to write and edit that book in 21 days, and then a week later. Less than a month, you'll see me go from concept to this is live in the store.
Amazing. So are you going to be documenting this process as you go?
I am. So I'm going to have pre-videos that are put up that'll start going up today and tomorrow that will tell you a little bit about the process that I'm going through. And then every single day I'll put up a video showing what I'm doing in Scrivener, how many words I got the previous day, and kind of all process so you see how I'm putting it together.
Where can we find those videos?
You can find this at chrisfoxwrites.com/challenge.
Okay. chrisfoxwrites.com/challenge. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. Chris, when that is over, will you come back on the show and recap what happened?
Absolutely, I'd love to.
Yeah, I would love to see how it goes and to find out what you learned from it and to see what the reaction is to it. That sounds awesome. Where can people find you and get plugged in with your work?
I am on Facebook, so that's the only social media I touch with chrisfoxwrites.com. This place to find me.
Okay. chrisfoxwrites.com. We'll put a link to that. Chris, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Hank. I really appreciate it.
I'd like to remind you, the listeners of the Author Stories podcast, that Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a 30-day free trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. I would like to personally recommend this week as an Audible pick of the week, No Such Thing as Werewolves, The Deathless Book 1 by Chris Fox. Chris was our guest on the show this week, and you heard the story about how this book came about, and you can get this book for free in audiobook format from Audible. All you have to do is go to audibletrial.com/Hank. That's Hank. Pick out the book that you want. You can pick up Chris Fox's book, No Such Thing as Werewolves, or you can pick any book in the entire Audible catalog. Download it for free. Listen to it on your iPod, iPhone, iPad, computer, Android device. Any way you normally would listen to things, you can get the Audible app for that device. Sign up for a free 30-day trial. That's absolutely free. Download the book, absolutely free. If you don't like the service, cancel it anytime, and you still get to keep the free audiobook. That's audibletrial.com/Hank.